How many people in this room have been to therapy? If I was presenting this live, that was the first question that I wanted to ask. And then I wanted to follow it up by asking, if you have been to therapy, have you ever felt nervous or self-conscious about the fact? Or maybe you're on medication for anxiety or depression and you feel self-conscious about that. I would wager that several of you watching this right now would say yes to at least one of those two things. And I would feel confident in doing so, not just because I myself would say yes to both of those things, but because of the research that has been done on mental illness stigma. Research on this topic is very young, actually, with the first published studies only really coming out in the later half of the 20th century. Given the history of our treatment of mental illness and of the mentally ill, and the fact that we really only started to make improvements in this area within the past few decades, it does seem intuitive to question if that mistreatment has left any residual effects on how we deal with mental illness today. Operationally defining mental illness stigma has been approached in many different ways, but one way that I have found most intriguing suggests a correlation between having a mental illness and the likelihood of being subjected to dehumanization. A study published in 2020 by Boysen and colleagues, for example, compared rates of dehumanization of those with mental illness to the dehumanization of other social groups who are known for commonly experiencing stigma, only to find that those with mental illness received significantly higher levels of dehumanization than any other group. Does that mean that everybody stigmatizes the mentally ill? I find that highly unlikely. But then does that mean that there are certain character traits that we could look at as being potential predictors as to who maybe is more prone to stigmatizing the mentally ill? Well, actually, a study published by Johnson-Kwoschka in 2020 actually looked at religiosity, of all things, on the levels of stigma across diagnoses, and found a significant impact of religiosity on each kind of diagnosis. And then in addition, a study published by Gonzalez and colleagues in the year 2021 actually also looked at authoritarianism as being potentially correlated with mental illness stigma, and found it to be significantly so. As I looked at these two predictors, I couldn't help but recognize that there might be a potential similarity between them. Old age? Further research actually made me realize that I was not the only one who had had that thought. Numerous studies showed evidence of a positive correlation between religiosity and age, and authoritarianism and age. With my research, I intend to look for interactions between age, religiosity, and authoritarianism in predicting mental illness stigma. Given previous research, I suspect that older age and higher levels of religiosity will predict higher levels of stigma, with higher rates of authoritarianism interacting with religiosity to increase that likelihood.